The ACE study, trauma sensitive yoga teacher training. Trauma is common. It has affected many people. And it isn't just something that we see in certain neighborhoods, economic classes, lines of work, cultures, or age groups. Trauma doesn't discriminate. Yoga teachers, you absolutely will have trauma survivors in your classes, and we have to be aware of how we will respond to that. There's been a ton of research conducted, and I'm going to upload a few studies in case you're interested. One study in particular I want to discuss, the ACE study. So the ACE study was conducted in California from 1995 through 1997. It was a joint study between the US government and private healthcare, and it really changed the way that we view trauma. What they did, they asked millions of people 10 questions. How many of these experiences did you have between the ages of birth and 18? And it's interesting to understand these 10 experiences. So people who had 6 or more experiences, their life expectancy was reduced by 20 years. If you had 4 or more experiences, then it was determined that you probably need professional help. And even with a score of only 1 to 2, there can be lasting effects experienced from the trauma. The higher the ACE score, the higher the risk of toxic stress and negative health outcomes. And there were all kind of negative health outcomes that came out of this. So we're all going to take the ACE questionnaire independently. But before we start, let's talk about this questionnaire. One of the things I really like about the ACE study is that there were no labels and it wasn't subjective. They asked millions of people these questions. But if they would have asked the same millions of people, were you traumatized as a child? Most would say no. If they would have asked them, did you experience trauma? They would probably say no, because you don't know what you don't know. And most people don't know that they've been traumatized. So the researchers knew that. So they didn't ask those questions because they knew that people are desensitized in a way to what they've been through. Everyone's life experience somehow, it just becomes our own personal standard of normalcy. And so therefore we won't recognize any of our own adverse childhood experiences as being anything other than typical or acceptable. And working with trauma survivors, I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone tell me that they weren't sexually abused, but there was this one time that this one family member did this thing. Or they weren't physically abused, but their parents really believed that this was the most effective way to instill respect and obedience. Or their dad did go to prison, but it didn't affect them. Mom was on drugs, but it didn't change anything. She still worked and held down her normal life. So this is why the researchers in the ACE study didn't ask people to label their own experiences. It's just yes or no questions. We're not interested in labeling anyone as being neglected or abused or otherwise mistreated. Labels aren't really helpful or always even accurate. So instead, we're looking at experiences that people go through and how these experiences are correlated to other negative health outcomes. So the questions that were asked were objective and not subjective. Most people are not inclined to say that their caretakers did something wrong, and it's not about right or wrong or good or bad. I mean, in some instances it probably is, but overall, we're not here to categorize our childhood or label it. So it's all about looking at experiences. After all, we're all just a culmination of all we have experienced and learned up to this very moment. And research has shown that these specific 10 experiences are related to negative health outcomes, including depression, anxiety, aggression, weakened immune system, shortened life expectancy, higher risk of cancer and other diseases, higher risk for substance abuse, and quite a bit more. Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire. So, the ACE study, ACE is an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experience. It's 10 questions, and you can find your ACE score pretty quickly. So, we're going to go over the questions, and the questions are while you were growing up during your first 18 years of life, did this ever happen? So it didn't have to happen repeatedly. If it even happened once, then the answer would be yes, and you would give 1 point for that. Ace question 1. Did a parent or other adult in the household often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? So, to be clear, this doesn't mean that you were physically hurt. It means that you felt a threat, a potential threat of being hurt. Or, if not that, you would also give yourself 1 point if someone cursed at you, or if they insulted you, or if they put you down, or if they humiliated you. And for this particular question, that would be with some kind of regularity. So we're not talking about one time out of your life your mother got so mad that she insulted you or said a bad word to you. But we're saying, like, on a regular basis for this particular question, those things happened. Or, if not those things, acted in a way that made you feel you might be physically hurt. So, like a sense of intimidation. Ace question number 2. Did a parent or other adult in the household often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you? Or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? So, the way that this question is worded, there's kind of two parts to this. And there's a or, not a and. So we're looking at, did a parent or other adult in the household often push, grab, slap, or throw something? So doing that on a semi-regular basis, or if not any of those things, ever even once hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured afterwards. So it would be a yes. If either parts of that question are a yes, then you give 1 point. Ace question number 3. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touched their body in a sexual way, or try to or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal sex with you? So for this one, this is, did this ever happen? So this didn't have to happen regularly. If any of these things mentioned happened even once, then you would give yourself a 1. Also, notice in the second part of the question, it's try to or actually. So it didn't actually have to happen, but even if someone tried it, you would give yourself a 1. Ace question number 4. Did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or that your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? So this is another or. Um, if you ever felt unloved or unspecial, you would give yourself a 1. And if that didn't happen, but you sometimes felt like your family wasn't close or didn't really look out for each other or support each other, you would give yourself a 1. Ace question number 5. Did you often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Or that your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? So this question is looking at neglect, and neglect can happen for a lot of reasons. So if you were worried that you didn't have food to eat, you would give yourself a 1, whether or not your parents had addictions. If you didn't have clean clothes, you would give yourself a 1. If you felt unprotected, you would give yourself a 1. Or even if those specific things didn't occur, but your parents were often using substances and unable to take care of you or provide health care and other things you need, then you would give yourself a 1. So you don't have to have the presence of all of these things to give yourself a 1. It's more so the presence of any of these things. Ace question number 6. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? And also, if your parents never lived together, you would give yourself a 1 if you did not have both parents in the home at any time. Ace question number 7. Was your mother or stepmother often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes or often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or a knife? So sometimes I really wish they divided these questions up instead of loading so much in here, and it's like or, ever, often, and we have to kind of sort it out. So for this one, if we're looking at pushing, grabbing, slapping, if you witness family violence against your mother or the maternal figure in your house, and it happens with some type of regularity, whether that's being pushed, grabbed, slapped, kicked, bitten, punched, or hit with an object, or having objects thrown at her more than one time throughout your childhood, that's a 1. Or if none of those things happen with any kind of regularity, but you once saw your mother or maternal figure in your home threatened with a gun or a knife, or you once saw this person hit repeatedly for an extended time period, you would give yourself a 1. Ace question 8. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker, alcoholic, or who used street drugs? Self-explanatory here. So if the answer is yes, give yourself a 1. And notice that it said, did you live with anyone? So this doesn't have to be a parent. It could be a sibling. It could be another family member that's in the home. Ace question number 9. Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? If yes, enter a 1. And again, this one doesn't have to be a parent. It can be any household member. Ace question 10. Did a household member go to prison? If yes, enter 1. So notice this question also isn't just talking about parents. It could be anyone that's living in the house. And if a parent that never lived in the house went to prison, that doesn't count because that doesn't really create trauma. But if a parent is living in the house and goes to prison, that's actually very traumatic for children. But any household member can be a scary thing for kids. So if the answer is yes on this one, then you would give yourself a 1. To get your ACE score, you add up all of your 1s, and the total number becomes your score. And this is such an amazing piece of research that changed the game for us on understanding how trauma affects people. It's really a hallmark piece because it shows us the negative health outcomes associated with trauma. A score of 6 or above means that if the trauma goes untreated, life expectancy is cut short by 20 years. A score of 4 or above means professional help is needed. And even a 1 to 2, means that you will have lasting effects of trauma. And remember that all people cope differently and trauma affects everyone differently. But what we know for sure is that when someone has experienced trauma, they are at a higher risk to experience depression, anxiety, overall mental health problems, drug and alcohol use, aggression. They're more likely to get cancer and other diseases because their immune systems are weakened. Moving past trauma, what we learned from this research and other bodies of research is that there are three ways that people can move past trauma. Number one, raising self awareness, connecting with yourself and others, talking it out, maybe counseling. Basically, it's about becoming aware of the trauma and how it has affected you. It probably involves revisiting memories and recognizing triggers and things like that. The second way is medication, which I'm not a fan of, but for some people, in some cases, it's necessary. The thing with medication is if you're if you're taking medication to help with anxiety, you might tend to be a little bit like a zombie, um, and have to play with the dosage. And if you're taking medication to help with depression, it can really kind of it can keep you up, but almost to the point where people become desensitized and they don't care about anything. Um, they feel numb. Either way, medication can have a numbing effect. So sometimes it's necessary, but if there's a way to not take medication and to take a more organic approach, I think that's best. And then as yoga teachers, what we're really concerned with is number three. The third way to move past trauma is by creating experiences in the body that directly contradict the helplessness, fear, rage, just the overall coming unglued that happens from trauma. And so yoga's not the only way we can do this. Some people like hiking. Some people like surfing. Some people are athletes, and it's their sport that gives them this experience in the body. But an experience in the body can be really important to move past trauma. And a lot of times, after people have been through trauma, depending on the nature and extent of the trauma, it's like they live in their minds and they're numb from the shoulders down, especially with like sexual abuse. Um, and so when we're working with people who've been through that, we really want to focus on a lot of breath work and just body awareness, just becoming aware of your body. Um, People that have been through physical abuse tend to be very aware of their bodies, and sometimes the way that the trauma affects them might be through aggression. Um, and so finding a experience in the body that contradicts the trauma experience can be really helpful in those cases. And so for all types of trauma, sometimes people have like an abandonment trauma, and they get a lot of anxiety because if anything happens that triggers that fear of, am I going to be abandoned? Am I going to be alone? Am I going to be okay? They get really scared, and then it causes a lot of anxiety, and they're worried about things that haven't happened yet. And so what we can do with our yoga is we can encourage them to be present in the moment. And that's something for all trauma survivors that's helpful, is that present moment awareness, right? Because whatever happened in the past, we can't control. There's no need to sit around and ruminate in the past. Whatever has whatever hasn't happened yet, it may or may not even happen. So there's no need to worry about the future and get all anxious about all the things that could potentially go wrong. And we just have to be able to hold space right in the present moment, and that's where we find our peace. That's where we find contentment. And it's not about finding happiness or finding joy, because that's something that's fleeting. Emotions come and go. You have happy moments, sad moments, all kinds of emotions are going to come and go, and we experience them when they're here and let them go when they go. But peace and contentment is something that we can have on a constant, consistent, regular basis as long as we are present in the moment. And it's not to say that we don't plan from the future. We do. We learn from the past, we plan for the future, but we want to live in the present moment. And so, as yoga teachers, this is where we get involved with helping with trauma. The first thing we want to do is we want to help raise awareness of the breath, body awareness, and present moment awareness.